Living in a bustling city, I always felt a sense of security amidst the chaos. The constant hum of traffic, the crowded metro stations, and the myriad of faces that blur into anonymity provided a strange comfort. But that sense of security was shattered one evening, an experience that still sends chills down my spine. My name is Samantha, but my friends call me Sam. I'm a college student, balancing a hectic schedule of classes, part-time work, and an active social life. On this particular evening, I was heading home from an evening class. The metro was sparsely populated, the usual hustle and bustle replaced by an eerie silence. I kept my eyes down, focusing on the worn-out sneakers on my feet, a habit I developed to avoid unwanted attention. As the train rattled along, I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I glanced up and noticed a man in a red hoodie. He was staring at me intently. At first, I shrugged it off. People often stared in the metro, but something about his gaze felt invasive, unsettling. When it was time to transfer to another line, I noticed the man following me. My heart rate quickened as I moved through the station, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. But he persisted, maintaining a close distance. I spotted a group of young men about my age, who looked like they were from the Middle East. Desperation led me to approach them, seeking safety in numbers. They noticed my distress and subtly positioned themselves between me and the man in the red hoodie. I boarded the next train, hoping to lose him, but he followed. As the doors were about to close, I made a split-second decision and darted out, leaving him trapped inside. I watched as the train sped away, taking my unwanted shadow with it. Relieved but still on edge, I began the short walk home from the metro station. It was a route I knew well, a 10-minute stroll through familiar streets. The stray dogs that roamed the neighborhood often accompanied me, their presence a comforting reminder of normalcy. That night, however, the usual sense of safety was replaced by a gnawing fear. A car crept up beside me, moving slowly, matching my pace. My heart pounded as I tried to ignore it, hoping it would drive away. It didn't. I fumbled for my phone and considered calling my dad but decided against it. He was overly protective and would react emotionally, potentially making the situation worse. Instead, I gripped the hair stick in my bag, a sharp, three-pronged tool I knew I could use to defend myself. Every horror story I'd ever heard played out in my mind. I was ready to fight, to do whatever it took to protect myself, but the car continued to follow, never stopping, and no one got out. When I finally reached home, I saw the car parked nearby, facing my window. The thick curtains provided some privacy, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Days later, I noticed the same car parked outside a friend's house when I visited her. My anxiety spiked, but I didn't mention it to anyone. I didn't want to seem paranoid, and frankly, I didn't trust the police to take me seriously. I did, however, leave a note in a book I gave to my friend, jokingly instructing her to start searching there if anything happened to me. My unease grew as more unsettling incidents occurred. Twice in the metro, different men approached me, asking if I knew someone. Each time, I shook my head, feeling a rising sense of dread. Then, one morning, I was jolted awake by a series of strange phone calls. The caller's voice was eerie, asking personal questions that made my skin crawl. I'd had enough. I ended the call with a firm warning. "You've made a huge mistake calling me." Determined to take control, I spent the next hour tracing the numbers. I found out everything about them. Their names, family members, addresses, even bank accounts. I saved all the information in a secure place, ready to be found if needed. The calls stopped, but the fear lingered. I knew I couldn't let my guard down. I was determined to show these people that they had chosen the wrong person to mess with. If they ever contacted me again, I'd be ready. Despite the fear that now shadowed my daily life, I was determined not to let it control me. I went about my routine with a heightened sense of awareness, my eyes constantly scanning for any signs of danger. The menacing encounters had instilled a sense of vigilance in me, transforming my once carefree commutes into tense, cautious journeys. My friends noticed the change in my demeanor. Mike, my closest friend, often commented on how I seemed more distant, more guarded. I confided in him about the stalker and the strange phone calls. Mike was supportive, but also visibly concerned. He insisted on walking me home from the metro whenever he could, which provided some comfort, but the fear was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. One evening, after a particularly long day, Mike and I sat in a quiet cafe, sipping on coffee and catching up. The conversation eventually turned to the stalker. "Sam, have you thought about going to the police again? Maybe with all the new information you've gathered, they'll take it more seriously," Mike suggested. I sighed, staring into my cup. "I don't know, Mike. Last time, they just brushed it off. Besides, I feel like I need to handle this on my own terms. I can't rely on them." Mike nodded, understanding but not entirely convinced. "Just promise me you'll be careful. You're not alone in this, okay?" His words were reassuring, and I promised to be vigilant. That night, as I walked home, I felt a strange mix of determination and fear. I was ready to confront my stalker, to show them that I was not an easy target. The following weeks were uneventful, but the sense of being watched never fully dissipated. I continued to see the car occasionally, parked in different spots around my neighborhood. Each time, my anxiety spiked, but I managed to keep my composure, knowing that showing fear would only give them more power over me. Then, one night, the tension finally reached its breaking point. I was walking home from a late shift at work, the streets eerily quiet. As I approached my apartment building, I noticed the familiar car parked across the street. My heart raced, but I refused to let fear take over. I had my hair stick ready, my phone in hand, and a newfound resolve to stand my ground. As I walked past the car, the door suddenly opened and a man stepped out. It was the same man from the metro, the one in the red hoodie. My blood ran cold, but I forced myself to stay calm. He approached me slowly, a sinister smile on his face. "Hello, Sam," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I've been waiting for this moment." I took a step back, gripping my hair stick tightly. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. He laughed softly. "Just a chat. You've been quite the elusive one, haven't you?" I glanced around, hoping for someone to appear, but the street was deserted. I knew I had to handle this on my own. "Stay away from me," I warned, taking another step back. He took a step forward, his smile widening. "Or what? You'll call the police? We both know how useless they are." I felt a surge of anger, overriding my fear. "You don't know who you're messing with," I said, my voice firm. "I've got everything on you. Names, addresses, even your bank accounts. If anything happens to me, the police will have all the evidence they need to take you down." His smile faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "You're bluffing," he said, but there was a hint of doubt in his voice. "Try me," I shot back, my confidence growing. "You're not the only one who can play this game." For a moment, we stood there, locked in a silent standoff. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back to his car. I watched as he drove away, my heart pounding with a mixture of relief and adrenaline. I didn't sleep much that night, the encounter replaying in my mind, but I felt a sense of victory, knowing that I had stood my ground and faced my fear head-on. The next day, I decided to follow Mike's advice and went to the police with all the information I had gathered. This time, they took me seriously. When I was younger, summer vacations and New Year's holidays were synonymous with one thing: road trips to Mexico. Each year, my family would pack up our car and embark on the long journey from our home in North Texas to visit relatives south of the border. Those trips were a blend of excitement, adventure, and the kind of family bonding that only hours together in a car can foster. I always looked forward to these trips, the prospect of seeing my cousins and experiencing the vibrant culture of Mexico, making the long drive worth every minute. The routine was always the same. We would leave at around 6 in the evening, aiming to cross the border by nightfall and reach our destination in the early hours of the morning. This particular trip started just like any other. I was 8 years old, full of energy and excitement as my parents, my siblings, and I piled into our car. My dad, Manuel, took the wheel, as he always did, and my mom, Lucia, settled into the passenger seat. My older siblings, Maria and Juan, and I squeezed into the back, surrounded by snacks, pillows, and the odd assortment of luggage we could fit into the trunk. As we left the city lights behind and headed into the open road, the familiar rhythm of the journey set in. My dad tuned the radio to a Spanish station, and soon, the car was filled with the sounds of lively mariachi music. The sky turned from a dusky pink to a deep indigo, the stars gradually emerging as we drove deeper into the night. I remember feeling a sense of wonder as I looked out the window, the vastness of the Texas landscape unfurling before me. About an hour after crossing the border into Mexico, the mood in the car began to shift. The freeway stretched ahead of us, an endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desert. Outside, it was pitch black, the only visible shapes being the dotted stars above and the occasional silhouette of cacti by the roadside. I was dozing off, lulled by the hum of the engine and the gentle sway of the car, when my mom's voice cut through the quiet. "Manuel," she said, her tone tinged with concern, "that car behind us has been following us since we left." My dad glanced in the rearview mirror, shrugging it off. "It's probably just someone going the same way. There are a lot of cars on this road," he said, trying to ease her worries. But my mom wasn't convinced, and neither was I. I peeked through the gaps in the luggage and saw the car she was talking about. It was trailing us, sometimes getting closer, then falling back again, like a shadow that wouldn't let go. My siblings noticed it too. Maria and Juan, always looking for excitement, turned the mysterious car into a game, making guesses about who might be inside and why they were following us. But as the car continued to tail us, their amusement turned into the same unease I felt. The car was always there, always trailing us, its headlights a constant presence in the darkness. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The car would ease off, only to press its blinding headlights against our rear window again, as if taunting us. My dad tried to keep calm, maintaining a steady speed, not slowing down or speeding up, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. My mom kept her eyes glued to the rearview mirror, her worry palpable in the confined space of the car. Then, after what felt like an eternity, my mom's voice rang out again, sharper this time. "Manuel, he's getting closer." We all turned to look, and she was right. The car was inching closer to ours, practically pressed against our rear bumper. The highway was deserted, just an endless stretch of road with no other cars in sight. It was downright scary. The next 30 minutes were some of the most tense moments I've ever experienced. The car would fall back, then speed up, its headlights glaring into our car. It felt like a game of cat and mouse, but one where we didn't know the rules or the stakes. My dad kept driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while my mom whispered urgent prayers under her breath. Just when the tension seemed unbearable, a stroke of luck came our way. My mom spotted a police car parked ahead on the side of the road. "Manuel, pull over right in front of the police car." "Now," she insisted. My dad didn't hesitate. He signaled and pulled over, stopping right in front of the police car. The car that had been following us kept driving, disappearing into the darkness. The police officer, a burly man with a stern face, approached our car, clearly puzzled by our sudden stop. My mom wasted no time explaining the situation, her words tumbling out in a rush. She told him about the car that had been following us, how it had taunted us, and how scared we all were. The officer listened intently, nodding as he took in the details. "There have been reports of people being targeted on these highways by gangs and car thieves," he said gravely. "You did the right thing by stopping here. I'll follow you for a while to make sure you're safe." With the police car now behind us, we felt a wave of relief wash over us. The officer's presence was a shield against the unknown dangers of the night. As we drove on, the desert landscape slowly began to lighten with the approach of dawn. The fear that had gripped us loosened its hold, replaced by a weary but palpable sense of safety. About 10 minutes later, we saw something that confirmed our worst fears. The car that had been following us was pulled over to the side of the road, its driver standing beside it, watching us pass by with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. The sight of the police car behind us seemed to have deterred him, but the encounter left a lasting impression on all of us. As the first light of day broke over the horizon, we finally reached our destination. My relatives greeted us with hugs and warm smiles, unaware of the ordeal we had just been through. The experience became a family story, a cautionary tale that we would recount during future trips. Years later, the memory of that night still lingers in my mind. It serves as a reminder of how vulnerable we can be, but also of the strength and resilience of my family. Despite the fear and uncertainty, we faced the situation together, and it brought us closer. And so, every time we embarked on a new road trip, we did so with a renewed sense of caution and gratitude. The open road, with all its beauty and unpredictability, became a place of both adventure and reflection, shaping our journeys in ways we could never have imagined. Ever since I was a kid, I've had this inexplicable fear of being near windows after dark. It's not just a mild unease. It's a full-blown, paralyzing terror that creeps up on me like a shadow. It starts with a feeling of dread, a kind of craziness that I can't quite suppress. My senses become hyper-aware, and I start to hear every little sound around me. The fear moves into my lungs, making it hard to breathe, while my fingers go numb with cold. I feel frozen in place, as if the fear is surging through my veins and oozing out of my pores. The small hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I feel an overwhelming need to run, to get away from the windows. It doesn't matter how many times I try to reassure myself that there's nothing to fear but fear itself. I'm 25 years old now, and I still lose sleep whenever I'm near a window without blinds after dark. I've tried everything to conquer this fear, but at this point, I've just chalked it up to being a quirk. When I was a child, I wasn't afraid of monsters under the bed. In fact, I often slept under my bed to avoid the windows. I was determined to show my parents that something was wrong, even though they never quite understood my fear. One night, when I was about 7 or 8, I remember lying under my bed with my heart pounding in my chest. My parents would check on me occasionally, and as soon as I saw their silhouettes in the doorway, I would have a full-blown panic attack. They even thought I got kidnapped once because I was hiding under the bed for so long. As a strongly independent child, I never told them about my fear until recently. It all came out during a casual conversation with my mom. We were talking about quirky things and sharing stories, which is something I've always loved. My mom's ghost stories, in particular, have always fascinated me. There aren't many, but every now and then, she'll share a tale that sends shivers down my spine. In the heat of the moment, I told her that while I haven't really experienced any ghosts, I have had some weird dreams and this paralyzing fear of windows at night. I wish she had just continued with her ghost stories. Instead, she looked me dead in the face and paused for a moment before responding. "When you were little, we had to put blinds on your windows," she began. At first, we didn't think it was necessary because the trees in front of the house were thick enough that a passing car couldn't see through them. But one night, we got a call from Anthony and Mike from the church. They were driving home from Bible study when they passed your window. They told us the headlights illuminated a man standing in the street, watching you through your window. Just a plain, unbroken stare. They called us as soon as they arrived home, and we immediately called the police. But by the time the police arrived, the man was gone. They didn't find anything, except for one part of a camera cartridge on the ground. My heart raced as she spoke, each word sinking in like a stone. I had always thought my fear was irrational, a product of an overactive imagination. But now, I realized there had been a very real reason for my terror. A man had been watching me through my window, night after night, while I slept. The thought sent chills down my spine and made my fear feel all the more justified. The revelation explained so much about my childhood anxiety. My parents never told me about the incident because they didn't want to scare me. They just put up the blinds and hoped it would be enough to protect me. But the damage was already done. My fear had taken root, and it had grown stronger with each passing year. As I sat there, absorbing my mom's words, I felt a mixture of emotions. Relief that my fear wasn't entirely unfounded. Anger at the man who had invaded my sense of safety, and a renewed determination to confront this lingering fear head-on. In the weeks that followed, I found myself thinking about that man more and more. Who was he? Why was he watching me? Did he ever come back after the police were called? The questions haunted me, and I knew that I needed to find answers if I ever wanted to move past this fear. I decided to do some research, starting with old newspaper archives and police reports. I spent hours at the local library, poring over microfilm and digital records, hoping to find any mention of a man watching children through their windows. It was slow going, and for a while, it seemed like I wouldn't find anything at all. Then, one day, I stumbled upon a small article buried in the back pages of a local newspaper from the late 90s. It described a series of incidents in our neighborhood where children had reported seeing a man outside their windows at night. The police had been investigating, but no arrests had been made, and the case had eventually gone cold. The article didn't provide much detail, but it confirmed that there had been other victims, other children who had felt the same fear that I did. It was a small comfort, knowing that I wasn't alone, but it also reignited my determination to find out more. I reached out to Anthony and Mike, the men from our church who had seen the man that night. They were both still active in the community, and when I contacted them, they were more than willing to talk. We met at a local coffee shop, and I could see the concern in their eyes as they recounted the events of that night. "We were driving home from Bible study, like your mom said," Anthony began. "It was late, and the streets were pretty empty. When we passed your house, We saw him standing there, just watching your window. It was eerie, the way he stood so still. We knew something was wrong, so we called your parents as soon as we got home." Mike nodded in agreement. "We stayed on the phone with your parents until the police arrived, but by then, the guy was gone. We never saw him again, but it always stuck with us, you know? It's one of those things you don't forget." Their words brought a new level of clarity to the incident. I could feel the sincerity in their voices, the genuine concern they had felt for my safety. It was comforting, but it also fueled my need to dig deeper. I continued my research, reaching out to other families in the neighborhood who had lived there at the time. Some had heard rumors, while others had experienced similar incidents but had never reported them. The more I learned, the more I realized that this man had been a ghostly presence in our community, haunting the edges of our lives without ever being caught. With each new piece of information, I felt a mix of fear and empowerment. The fear came from the realization of how close I had been to real danger, while the empowerment came from taking control of the narrative, from understanding the roots of my terror and confronting it head-on. One night, as I sat in my apartment, I decided to face my fear directly. I turned off all the lights and stood by the window, forcing myself to look out into the darkness. My heart raced, and I felt the familiar burn in my lungs. But I stayed there, rooted to the spot. I reminded myself that I was safe, that the man was long gone, and that I had the power to overcome this fear. It wasn't easy, and it took many nights of standing by the window, battling the fear that rose within me. But slowly, I began to feel a shift. The terror that had once gripped me started to loosen its hold. I found solace in the knowledge that I was no longer a helpless child, that I had faced the darkness and come out stronger. As I continued this nightly ritual, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the paralyzing fear of my childhood to the discovery of the truth, and finally, to the confrontation with my deepest anxieties. It was a journey of growth, resilience, and self-discovery. In sharing this story, I hope to offer a sense of understanding and solidarity to those who might be facing their own fears. We all have our shadows, our moments of darkness, but it's in facing them that we find our true strength. And sometimes, the journey to overcome our fears can lead us to discover parts of ourselves we never knew existed. It was the kind of warm, sun-drenched afternoon that seemed to hold the essence of my childhood within its golden rays, a reminder of endless summers past. I was about 6 or 7 years old, living in a close-knit neighborhood where the echoes of children's laughter mingled freely with the rustling leaves of old oaks and maples that lined our streets. It was a community where doors seldom needed locking and neighbors gathered often, sharing life's little ups and downs over lemonade and barbecues. That particular day, a bunch of us neighborhood kids were out playing in the street. We were a motley crew of various ages, from the 5-year-old twins, Timmy and Tammy, who lived next door, to our unofficial leader, 13-year-old Marina Harper, who was often seen zooming down Maple Street on her slightly rusty but trusty bicycle. I remember feeling the rough asphalt under my hands as I chalked out a hopscotch grid, completely engrossed in my task. Suddenly, Marina stopped pedaling. Her bike came to a screeching halt, and she stood there, one foot still on a pedal, staring down the street with an intensity that made all of us pause and look up. "Do you guys see that?" she whispered, not taking her eyes off whatever it was that had caught her attention. Following her gaze, we saw him, a man standing at the far end of the street. He was far enough away that details were hard to make out, but even from a distance, there was something unsettling about his presence. He stood perfectly still, his attention fixated on us, a silent observer to our childhood games. Back then, I didn't really understand homelessness or what it meant to be destitute. To me, he was just a man who had an odd smell, a sour, lingering odor that seemed to drift down the street with the breeze. But Marina, with a maturity beyond her years, seemed instantly on edge. "Stay here," she instructed firmly before pedaling towards the man. We watched, a cluster of anxious children, as Marina approached him. She stopped a safe distance away, her voice carrying back to us. "Hi there, can we help you with something?" she called out. The man didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at her, his expression unreadable. Marina quickly turned her bike around and pedaled back to us, her face pale. "I don't like this," she muttered. "He's just weird. And he's right in front of Lily's house. I don't want to go home with him standing there." Lily, Marina's little sister, clutched at her arm, looking up at her with wide, fearful eyes. "Can we tell your mom?" she asked. Marina shook her head. "Not yet. Let's get Mrs. Thompson. She'll know what to do." Mrs. Thompson, my mother, was known in our neighborhood for her no-nonsense attitude and her fierce protective instinct, not unlike a Jack Russell Terrier, as Marina often described her. Small and unassuming at first glance, she had a spine of steel and a voice that could command attention and respect. "Mom," I called out as we ran up to our front porch, where she was likely enjoying her afternoon tea. "There's a strange man watching us play, and he's making everyone uncomfortable." Without hesitation, my mom set her teacup down and marched out to the street, her determination palpable. As she approached, the man finally moved, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his gaze darting nervously. "What's going on here?" my mom demanded, her voice stern as she stopped a few feet away from him. The neighborhood had gone quiet, the usual sounds of laughter and chatter replaced by tense silence. The man opened his mouth to speak, then closed it, his eyes finally meeting hers. There was a moment of intense silence, a standoff right there in the middle of our peaceful street. Then, without warning, he turned and walked away, his steps hurried and uneven as he disappeared around the corner. Relieved but still shaken, we all watched him go. My mom watched longest, her eyes narrowing as she took in every detail, her mind already turning over what needed to be done next. The moment the man turned the corner, the atmosphere on Maple Street seemed to shift, as if everyone collectively exhaled the breath they'd been holding. My mother's eyes scanned the street, her protective gaze lingering on each of us kids before she turned her attention back to where the man had disappeared. "All right, everyone inside," she commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm calling the police. No one goes back out until we know it's safe." The twins immediately scampered off towards their home, clutching each other's hands tightly. Marina helped her sister Lily off her bike, her protective arm never leaving her sister's shoulders as they walked back to their house. I stayed close to my mom, feeling the safest by her side. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed the police, her words crisp and clear as she reported the incident. "Yes, there was a man here on Maple Street, watching the children play. He didn't engage when spoken to and seemed off. Yes, we would appreciate it if someone could come by to check the area." As we waited for the police to arrive, Marina and a few of the other older kids came back out, drawn by the gravity of the situation and perhaps a bit of the inherent curiosity that comes with youth. We gathered on our porch, whispering and speculating about the man and why he had been watching us. "He looked so weird, just staring," Marina said, wrapping her arms around herself as if to ward off a chill. "And why didn't he say anything? That's the creepiest part." "Yeah," added Jake. Another neighbor kid who had joined us on the porch. And standing right by your house, Marina. It's like he knew you'd have to go past him to get home. The conversation was cut short by the arrival of a police cruiser. An officer stepped out, his expression serious as he approached us. My mom went down to meet him, explaining the situation again and pointing out where the man had last been seen. The officer, a young man with a kind face, nodded as he listened, his eyes scanning the street thoughtfully. "We'll take a look around, ma'am. It's probably nothing, but it's good you called it in. We've had a few reports of suspicious individuals in the area. It's always better to be cautious." He walked down the street, his partner joining him as they searched the area. They spoke with a few other neighbors, their presence a comforting reminder of the community's vigilance. After a thorough check, the officer returned, reassuring us that they had found no one suspicious and reminding us to keep an eye out and report anything out of the ordinary. "Stay safe, and don't hesitate to call us if anything else happens," he advised before getting back into his cruiser and driving away. That evening, the mood on Maple Street was subdued. The incident had cast a shadow over our usually bright and carefree days. Parents were more cautious, peering out of windows, and kids played closer to home. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the lawns, my mom sat me down on the porch swing. "You know, sometimes people don't have anywhere to go, and it makes them do things that seem strange to us," she said gently, trying to explain the complexity of human behavior to my young mind. "But he scared everyone," I replied, grappling with the emotions of the day. "Yes, he did," my mom agreed, her arm around my shoulders. "And that's why we have to look out for each other. We might not be able to solve everyone's problems, but we can protect our own. Remember that community isn't just about sharing good times. It's also about standing together when things get tough." That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the day replayed in my mind. The fear, the protective embrace of the community, and my mom's words all wove together into a lesson I'd carry with me. Maple Street wasn't just a place. It was a community, a family bound not by blood but by a shared commitment to each other's safety and well-being. As I drifted off to sleep, the echoes of the day softened, blending into the night's quiet reassurance that tomorrow would return us to our games and laughter, under the watchful eyes of those who cared.